Hello and warm welcome to everyone to our launch event of Linnean Future. This has been many months in the works, in the background, and we have an excellent lineup of speakers. For those of you who haven't looked into our Twitter today, we have a surprise guest who will be introduced to you later on. If you do tweet or share this event, please feel free to do so, but do tag us. We would love to keep track of it. Now I hand it over to Sandy, the president of the Linnean Society. Over to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Padma. Thanks very much. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Linnane Society, even though it's only virtually, and the launch of this new committee in collaboration, Linnean Future. I'm Sandy Knapp, and I'm the current president of the Society, and I'm really, really pleased to be here tonight. This new initiative came about through a concatenation of different events. Our governance review, which looked at how our society could best equip ourselves to go forward into the next decade of the 21st century, the increasing need for all of us as citizens of the world to do our own bit to help our planet, and a bold challenge from one of our fellows, John Box, who's here tonight, for the society to actually do something about climate change. In thinking about that challenge from John in council, we realized that while the staff and fellows had been beavering away trying to reduce our carbon footprint, host more events concerned with climate change and other environmental issues, we'd been doing all this rather quietly and without letting our fellows actually know the direction of our travel and our intentions. So council decided to put a resolution to the fellowship at the anniversary meeting last year in May that we would use the Society's unique platform of a global engaged fellowship to highlight, communicate, and facilitate action to address the planetary emergency. Now, why a planetary emergency, you might ask? Why not climate change or biodiversity loss? I know that some might think a planetary emergency is a bit overdramatic, but looking at any one of those things like climate change or biodiversity loss in isolation means blinkering ourselves not only to effects and synergies, but also to the possible transformative solutions that we could bring at the intersection of all of these things. The planet we all share is in peril. From many sides: climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental destruction, the emergence of new diseases as we've seen this year. And by resolving to highlight the planetary emergency, the Society means to bring to the fore the interdigitating impacts that we, the species that Carl Linnaeus called Homo sapiens, are having on this, our collective home, planet Earth. We resolve actually to live up to our scientific name and be thinking persons. And as a society and fellowship to do more than just think, but to really engage, inspire, and involve people of all ages and backgrounds in nature and its significance. You'll hear tonight from several fellows and others about what the Linnean Future Initiative means for us as a society, what the planetary emergency means to them, some of the actions that people are taking, and also how you can become involved. The Linnean Future website went live today, and I urge you to have a look. We'll be updating content regularly and welcome suggestions for blogs or items to highlight. Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to Steph and the committee for chairing this new venture and bringing us together tonight. I'd now like to introduce Steph Holt, a member of Linnean Society Council, who will take us from here. Thanks very much, Steph, and thanks a lot to the committee for bringing this all together on behalf of the Society.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to come along to this launch event of Linnean Future, the Planetary Emergency Response of the Linnean Society of London. I'm Steph Holt, and I'm now chair of the current committee that has been working on this since the resolution back in May last year. And really, I wanted to use this evening to introduce you to some of the work that we have been doing. We're also going to be hearing from some speakers as well this evening. And to finish the event off, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we want to do next, how we want to drive this initiative forward for the Society. So, in order to kickstart this new initiative for the Society, we formed a small committee. This startup committee was formed of myself, John Box, who initiated a lot of these conversations, Andy Purvis, who we'll be hearing from later this evening, and initially Blanca Huertas as well. And we were joined by Padma Ghosh, Helen Shaw, and Elizabeth Rollinson, who has now moved on from the Society, but representing the staff of the Linnane Society as well. Initially, we wanted to establish what the core strands of work we needed to focus on for this new initiative would be, and see where we could make progress quickly. It was rapidly established that this initiative needed to function right across the whole remit of the Society's work and operations. So we've outlined 4 core areas of work that we really want to focus on going forward, and you can see them here. Practicing what we preach, improving the sustainability of ways of working in the Society in relation to the planetary emergency of climate change and biodiversity loss. Research in action, supporting collaboration and research addressing the planetary emergency, particularly in the areas of taxonomy and systematics. Sharing our expertise, ensuring the Society acts as a forum and focus for scientific debate, practical discussion and policy advice at both national and global scales regarding biodiversity in relation to the planetary emergency. And last, inspiring action, engaging and involving our fellows, our members and the public in debate and learning to highlight, communicate and facilitate action addressing the impact of the planetary emergency on our natural world. These 4 core aims will form the overarching principles for how we progress on this important work, and indeed has guided how we've been working to date as well. So far, what have we achieved? This isn't just about setting up a talking shop, far from it. It's about positive action, how we can really gear ourselves towards focusing on this critical issue. Well, Helen in the Linnane Society staff had already been working on a regular sustainability update and has been looking at ways of improving sustainable ways of working in the Society already. And together with John, they've built a bespoke carbon footprint calculator for the Society using CO2 as an equivalence by which to measure all of our resource use, covering everything from travel to how we cater our events, to how we heat and light our buildings, even down to how we purchase our stationery. And this has allowed us to develop a carbon action plan for the Society. This is available now on our webpage, and we'll be publishing a blog on this soon too, discussing how we've taken particular approaches to this. I'll be talking about some of the next steps we're wanting to work on that too later on. And you can see here our new webpage, or the top part of it. Within this webpage as well, when you get the chance to have a look at it, you'll see that we've been starting to collate information on what we've already been doing as a society on climate change and the biodiversity crisis as well. There's been a lot going on over the years, just with less of this particular focus. We've been pulling together existing papers from our journals, podcasts, videos, which highlight these key strands of work, and have added additional specific focus to some of them on our new web pages for you to have a look at. And that really hopefully will highlight some of the breadth of the research and work that's been done so far. Of course, we are today launching our new web pages. I'm going to allow you to explore those at your leisure, but increasingly we want this to become a hub for planetary emergency-based science, networking and communication from the Society. We'll be talking about some of those plans later on as well. But to me, drawing in our fellowship is one of the most important lines of our work here. The planetary emergency affects every single one of us, no matter where we are. And as natural historians, we all have a part to play. The wonderful thing about our society is that we draw together people from all across the world, all with a shared passion. Our fellows include amateur natural historians, students, politicians, communicators, educators, and some of the most acclaimed scientists in the world. While we're based in London, our fellowship is truly global. We have many members in the UK, but across India, throughout Africa, Australia, the US, and South American countries too. And hopefully within people listening tonight, we've got many people from around the world with us this evening. This change in how we present our talks and our lectures through this virtual environment has allowed us to reach out to so many more of our fellows in a different way. The recent crisis, it's not even recent anymore, has allowed us to look at new ways of interacting with our fellows. We've got people with research interests which are truly cross-continental, as well as people studying biodiversity simply in their back gardens. All of that has its importance. We've already started reaching out to you, as you know, and we're so pleased that our new name for this initiative, Linnean Future, the Planetary Emergency Response with the Linnane Society, came in as a suggestion from one of our fellows and was selected by our fellows with almost half of the nearly 500 votes cast. There's much more to come though, and as a society, we can only be impactful in this with your support. I'm going to be coming back to how we're hoping to do some of this later this evening. But for now, I want to hand you over to our three speakers for this evening. First of all, and probably needing very little introduction, I'm delighted to say that we've got one of our newest fellows, globally best known as a comedian and actor, but possibly also to many of us as a keen natural historian, with a particular interest in the work of one of my favourite past fellows of the Society, Alfred Russel Wallace. Bill Bailey, I'd like to pass over to you for your thoughts on this new initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Stephanie. And it's great. I'm delighted to be part of this endeavour, and delighted to be a new fellow of the Linnane Society. It's a great honour to be part of this organisation. As you say, I've championed Alfred Russel Wallace and walked in his footsteps. So it's it's a great honour to be asked and to be part of this event tonight. So well, anyway, kia ora and haere mai from a bright and breezy Auckland. Yes, it's Bill Bailey here, and I've got a few words, a statement to make about this proposal. Our planet is in crisis, and it is being battered by the twinned impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. And these are not small incremental effects, but increasingly dramatic changes in our weather patterns and ecosystems. We read dire headlines, listen to scientists imploring action, even consume climate fiction. Climate change and extinction are now a part of a daily conversation, not just a distant future predicted by scientists in journals. The Linnane Society is a unique organization that brings together people from across the world who enjoy the splendor of the natural world in many different ways. Some as scientists, some as artists, some as naturalists, some as historians, and others interested citizens of this planet. In operation since 1788, the Society is the oldest natural history society in the world. This has afforded us a long as well as a wide view of how we got here. It is crucial to note the importance of natural history as we continue to measure the adverse impacts humankind has had on planet Earth. Over the past centuries, the Society has continued to be a vibrant and exciting place where keen, focused scientists and enthusiastic, knowledgeable amateurs can come together and discuss latest developments. Today, it is even more critical that the Society aims its attention and energy on this current planetary emergency, that it uses its unique platform to create collaborations, share expertise, and inspire people to create change. As one of the Society's newest fellows, I'm really excited by this and encourage all of you, especially our fellows, to come together and get involved. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. It's wonderful to have you here, even though it's very early in the morning for you over in Auckland. And welcome to your first Linnane Society meeting as well. I hope we'll see you at many more.
I'm delighted to be here. Yes, I hope so.
Brilliant. Thank you. Our next two speakers for this evening are likely known to many of you for their work in research and policy. Professor Andy Purvis is Merit Researcher at the Natural History Museum, and Dr. Ruth Waters is Deputy Chief Scientist at Natural England and Analyst for the Descriptive Review of the Economics of Biodiversity at Her Majesty's Treasury. Delighted to hand you over to Andy now to speak a little bit about the science of the planetary emergency.
Thanks very much indeed, Steph. And thanks also to Bill for those truly inspiring words. What I'm hoping to outline over the next 10 minutes is basically the planetary emergency is real. This isn't a drill. This is a genuine emergency, but it is not a hopeless situation. If we act, if we do, we even know how we need to act, and we act urgently, we can turn this around. And then Ruth will speak after me and enlarge further on the importance of these changes and how they can be made. So I was involved in the IPBES global assessment, and as part of that work, we showed that extinction rates are tens to hundreds of times what they would naturally be at the moment, which is a terrifying statistic. In the last 500 years, we've lost 700 vertebrate species, 500 plants that we know about, but that is nothing compared to what is coming down the track if we don't change course. This picture shows Najin and Fatu, and they are the last two northern white rhinos. They are mother and daughter. This is one of the million lineages that are now threatened with extinction through human action. That's a very imprecise figure because we don't even know exactly how many species there are on the planet, but it's made up of an estimated 10% of insect species, 25% of other animals, more for large animals like these rhinos, and as many as 40% of plants. So extinction, the loss of mainly rare species, is a tragedy on any scale. But the biodiversity crisis is far more than just species extinction. Ecological communities are being torn apart by human action on a massive scale. This is a map that comes from my own research with the Predicts project at the Natural History Museum, and it estimates the fraction of natural biodiversity remaining in terrestrial ecosystems. And it's very low in most of the developed world. So the UK is among the most nature depleted countries on the planet. Now, does this matter? Well, yeah, the last year has really shown us one of the many ways that this matters, because when ecological communities are intact, they do a very good job of controlling disease organisms. But when they're damaged, the wild hosts of zoonotic diseases that can infect humans as well become much more common. And the pandemic is a zoonotic disease. And it's estimated that most of the zoonotic diseases of the last 80 years have been driven by land use change, predominantly associated with agriculture. So biodiversity provides us with all sorts of things. It's a sort of safety net for us. And so its loss really matters. And there's evidence that that safety net is starting to fall apart. So this is a slightly complex schematic, but we have over here the natural system, and then bolted on the side of that is the human system, with this overlap here where we manage ecosystems. And so nature has the potential to provide us with things, and then there's a level of contribution that it actually does provide us with. Also, the environmental conditions are influenced by nature, and all of these things affect quality of life. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is that the potential for nature to contribute to human well-being is decreasing across nearly every category of contribution that nature can make to us. The only exception being food production, because we're gearing up more and more of the planet to provide us with food. But everything else is starting to show declines. And despite all our attempts to improve the efficiency with which we convert nature into things we want, and our ability to find substitutes, other goods that can do the job, we're starting to see widespread negative impacts on quality of life. One of the other things that the IPBES global assessment did was hold a sort of driver Olympics to see which of the ways that we impact ecosystems has the biggest influence in driving biodiversity loss. When we did that, we found that climate change, which is at the forefront of people's minds in these discussions, actually doesn't even get a medal in this driver Olympics, except in the marine realm, where it gets the silver. And the big two are land use change and direct exploitation of organisms. But over the coming sort of 3 decades or so, the expectation is that climate change will rise in importance to rival these, but it doesn't mean the other drivers are going away. These are the direct drivers. The underlying drivers are socio-economical, socio-political, population growth, economic growth, consumption. But we can't go on like this. If we're going to be fair to future generations and fair to poorer people with less privileged lives in the current generation, we're going to have to make changes. And we actually know from a range of sources the sorts of things that we need to do. First of all, we know that there is no one change we can make to how we use the natural world that will be sufficient. We need a portfolio of actions. But a lot of these we've known about for years, and we know work on a small scale, but they need to be massively upscaled. We need to conserve and restore habitat. That will also help us, though it's not enough, to prevent runaway climate change if we conserve and restore habitat that can store lots of carbon and draw it down from the atmosphere. We need to farm in ways that are less polluting. We need to take a bit less from nature, and we need to consume less. A plant-based diet, for instance, is a big help, but also things like fast fashion. Do we really need it to be quite so fast, quite so damaging? All of these changes are going to require investment and work, and they lead to the very obvious question, oh, we know we've got to do it, but can't we kick the can down the road a bit? Do we have to start now? And so myself and collaborators, a range of institutions, tried to address this question of the urgency of biodiversity action by looking at a trajectory where we act now and comparing it with one where we kick the can down the road just by a decade. So at the moment, biodiversity is declining rapidly, but if now in 2021, we start big actions, it'll take a while to turn this super tank around. Biodiversity on average around the world will continue to fall, but we can turn it round and get back to where we are now by 2050, giving future generations the same opportunities that we have benefited from. Now, in order to do this, it's a big deal. We've got to restore 290 million hectares in 30 years. So that's kind of half an Amazon worth. That's the level of forest expansion that we need. So alternatively, we could leave the current trajectory as it is going for a further decade. And then in order to get back to the same point we're at now by 2050, we'll need a bigger change of direction. We'll have to kick in more, but we could do it maybe. But now we need to reforest, nearly twice as much in 2/3 the time. And the key thing is If governments delay those decisions by a decade, taxpayers will have to pay twice as much. That's how much the financial incentives will cost. Also, food prices will rise as a fraction of income, which could be desperately bad news for the world's poor, and we don't know whether we can actually regrow forests that quickly on that scale. So, I hope I've convinced you, if you needed any convincing, that this is a real situation, it is not a drill, but that we do still have the option of a good future. And here, the Linnean Society is brilliantly placed to make a difference. We can be advocates for the nature that we know about. There is so much basic science that we still haven't done. Most of these million threatened species have not even been formally described yet. But also we have a role to play in helping setting restoration targets, advising organizations wanting to make a difference. We have to get in the pulpit and infuse people about nature. And also we have to practice what we preach. We have to take ambitious steps ourselves as well as demanding them of others. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Well, thanks everybody so much for having me at this event. And what I want to do is tell you a bit about the Dasgupta Review, which is an independent global review that was commissioned by the Treasury on looking at the economics of biodiversity. And basically it's been led by Professor Partha Dasgupta. And it's calling for a fundamental change and the way that we undertake mainstream economics. And importantly for us, it's based on really sound ecological principles and earth sciences. And it puts nature and biodiversity at the heart of this framework and thinking. And this piece of work was actually commissioned by the Treasury in 2019 because it recognised that economic and finance decision makers are key actors to address issues of biodiversity loss and societal well-being. So this piece of work is really framed for economics and finance decision makers, but I think has really important implications for those of us that care about biodiversity too. So just moving on, I just wanted to describe a bit how biodiversity and nature fits into this framing. And basically it uses ecosystems as the foundational units. And of course, biodiversity within these ecosystems enables them to work best. And when they're working well, they produce ecosystem goods and services, which are essentially benefits on which we rely, that contribute to both our produced capital, the stuff that we make, human capital, so our learning, our health, and our ability to be good members of society, and ultimately the economy. And the key thing about biodiversity in supporting ecosystem functions and processes is that many of these are irreplaceable. We can't simply substitute them for other forms of technology. So that makes them really critical from this flow from ecosystems through to the economy. What the review says is that biodiversity loss is essentially an asset management problem, and it views nature as an asset. It produces a flow of goods and services over time in the way we would consider other assets to do so, produce assets, for example. And in the way that diversity in a financial portfolio reduces risks and uncertainties around your return, biodiversity in our natural assets and in the natural world reduces the risks and uncertainties around all of these benefits that we get from nature and on which society and the economy relies. But also what the review says, that actually that responsibility about managing our assets, our natural assets, is based on all of us. We are all asset managers, whether we're individuals or households or in government. We all make decisions that changes the distribution and the amounts of different forms of capital we have, whether it's produced, human or natural. And we do that in our spending, whether we realise we're doing it or not. But unfortunately, we've been failing to manage our global portfolio of assets. And what this graph shows is the global natural capital, the global capital accounting per head of 3 different forms of capital since the early 1990s. And this is a graph that's been produced by UNEP. And what you can see here is that our produced capital in that time has doubled roughly. Our human capital has increased by 13%, but our natural capital has declined by 40%. So we're sort of essentially running down our stocks of natural capital whilst we're accumulating these other forms of capital, and that simply is not sustainable. So what the review then frames this using something we've called the impact inequality equation, which you can see inside this globe. And don't worry, it's quite straightforward to understand. On one side of this equation, we've got nature's supply, which is made up of our stock of nature within the biosphere and its ability to regenerate. And on the other side, we've essentially got our demands on nature. And this is made up of the number of people, their economic activity per head, and the efficiency within which we use stuff from the biosphere and nature, and the waste and pollution we put back in. And at the moment, we know that our demands are far exceeding the ability of nature to supply those. And it's been doing this for many decades, in effect. So, I mean, in the way that Andy described, we know biodiversity loss is a massive issue for us as biologists, but it's also really a key problem for the economy because of this sustainability issue. We can't carry on as we're going on. And 2 key reasons that we need to act urgently around this are around tipping points and option value when you're thinking as an economist or a financial decision maker. So the issue around tipping points is that we have these stable ecosystems that when they become degraded or we lose biodiversity, they tip into another stable state, which is less productive and less biodiverse. But the problem with these tipping points, as I'm sure you know, many of you know, is they're really unpredictable to know when they're going to occur. They can be really rapid and they can have really far-reaching effects. So, for example, if the Amazon tips to savanna, which is something which we're all worrying about, then it will have a lot of impacts, including changes to the global water cycle. The other really critical thing about these tipping points is they're often irreversible. And so you can't simply go back very easily. You pass the point of no return. So this is a massive risk and uncertainty for us as a society and for the economy. The other aspect why we really need to act urgently from an economic perspective is really around something we call option value. So as Andy said, not only is extinction a huge tragedy for biology, but it also reduces potential solutions for challenges we might have in society now and in the future. So an example of this is around 70% of our cancer drugs are derived from or inspired by natural products at the moment. So it really does pay for us to conserve rather than restore, to keep our options open. That also reduces risks and uncertainty. And as Andy described really nicely, it's also much less costly to act now than it is to leave it and kick the can down the road. And one of the critical reasons that the review describes why we're having a lot of these problems is really a failure of our institutions, and it's really widespread institutional failure. Institutions can be anything from households to businesses to governments, anywhere that kind of make these kind of collective decisions. And what's happening is that institutions are failing to record their use and impact on the environment. And we think that's largely because of 3 key reasons about nature. One is that it's very mobile, so often because of the mobility, you're not aware that the impacts that you're having on nature because it may be felt somewhere else. And also many of the things that go on in nature are silent and invisible. For example, things like biodiversity in soil under our feet, which is hugely important, but most people have no idea that it's going on. So we simply don't account for nature in this decision. Nature is open to all, often free. So the full value of nature and all these benefits that we get from it are just not captured in our markets and are not captured in our accounting. And this leads to something that economists call externalities, all of these values which aren't properly taken into account in decision making, which causes massive problems. So one of the core things that the review says is that we need to be really clear in the way that we undertake our mainstream economics and economic decision making, that the economy is embedded within nature, within the biosphere. And this means the economy is limited by the biosphere, it is bounded by the biosphere, and therefore it changes the lens through which you make all your economic decision making. And it may come as a surprise to you that this is not the case, and this is not where economists are at the moment. But what they do at the moment is, whilst they might recognise some things are limiting, they hope that technology will get us out of a sticky patch. And many of the ways that we do work kind of sets us outside of nature, rather than being part of the biosphere ourselves. So this change is really fundamental. So what the review does is actually suggest 3 core areas where we need to make a transition. One is around balancing that impact equation I showed you earlier, but also increasing nature's supply, because we're saying it's not just enough to balance, we need more nature as well. The second thing is around changing these measures of economic success, so that all of the economy is geared up to sustainable engagement with nature and doesn't continue to contribute to the decline through poor decision making. And the third thing is around transforming these institutions that I talked about, so they can support us in this sustainable engagement with nature. And I'm just finally going to run through 3 slides quickly to tell you a little bit more about them. So in terms of balancing the impact equation and increasing nature's supply, we really need to invest in nature, conserve and restore it, make places where people and nature can thrive together. We're really keen to address issues of consumption and production and supply chains, and to make those sustainable and fair. And we want to manage this demographic transition by providing better family planning and reproductive health care, and also increase the efficiency with which we use stuff from the biosphere and reduce the amount of waste and pollution. Of course, technology can really help us with this. The second key area that the review highlights is around this economic decision making, and it recommends inclusive wealth, which is a combination of natural capital, which is nature, the contribution nature makes, produced capital, which is really what we're doing now, the produced capital bit, and also social capital, human capital, sorry. And when you combine these, you get a much better way of looking at long-term sustainability over generations, whereas GDP at the moment is useful, but only for very short-run decisions. And so there's a number of ways that we can increase our ability to do inclusive wealth through various techniques, which include nature in accounting and including nature in our productivity measures. And then finally, on the institutional transformation, we need these institutions to support this sustainable engagement, really capture nature in its decision making. And in particular, the review focuses on education as being really critical, so that all of society at all levels understands the importance and the role that nature plays, reforming the way that economics is taught as well, really having institutions that can deal with these broad, wide-ranging public goods like the open ocean and rainforest, but also focuses in on our finance systems to enable them to support and sustainably engage with nature. So that's it. That's what I wanted to tell you about the review, and I think now we're open to a couple of questions. Thank you.
For the final section of talking, before we get to questions and both about Linnean Future and also about our talks this evening as well, I wanted to talk to you briefly about what we want to do next. What we've done so far with Linnean Future and this small committee that we've started is really just the start, and we've got lots of plans for the future, and many of them involve you, our fellows. So we've got a lot of plans that we've been considering, looking right across those 4 core areas of work. Some of that will be at looking at potential conferences, how we can engage, how can we can support research and networking. Some of it is how we communicate messages about the planetary emergency to many different audiences, from a position of expertise of the society, from children to politicians, the general public and researchers. Some of it will be looking at our sustainability as an organisation through the lens of our new carbon action plan as well. And we really want to work closely with our fellows through this initiative. In reality, we just cannot do it without you. Currently, we're suggesting that there's a couple of ways to get involved as a starting point. And on our website, we've included a link for you to nominate yourself to either join our committee or to add your name and interest areas to a resource pool, in a way, for people who might be able to help out with particular tasks, activities or events. It might be that you have some research that you would like to share as a talk, a podcast or a blog, that you have particular interest in supporting a specific strand of our work, or you'd just like to put your hat in the ring to help out when things get busy. If so, please do put yourself down for that so we can contact you for additional support and we know what you're interested in. Regarding the committee, we're looking to expand to around 10 to 12 members who can cover a breadth of interests. And we're really keen to include within that fellows from around the world, from all backgrounds. We want to create a diverse as a committee and way of thinking about this planetary emergency as we can. Our meetings will be virtual and we'll look at making all reasonable adjustments to make sure that people can attend. They're likely to be around every 2 months, but you'd also need to be able to work and lead on projects outside of those meetings as well. We're also really keen that this committee includes the voices of our younger fellows. So student fellows and those of you who are under 25 will be reserving places specifically for you. So please volunteer if you can. We really want to make sure we're including those voices in our society. I'll let you explore the new web pages in your own time. You can see some of the elements of the web pages that you can have a look through yourselves on this slide. But this is also something we're looking to develop further. This again is a starting point. We particularly want to use the web pages not just from communication from the society, but as a vehicle for generating connections and conversations. We're hoping to develop more scope for blogs, microblogs, podcasts featuring our fellows, and hopefully not in the not too distant future, perhaps a facility where we can map and hopefully open networking links between our fellows right across the world to better support communication between our scientists and offer a forum for discussion and collaboration. Really, the virtual heart and centre of the society is a forum for natural history and back to our first principles as a society, with a focus on research around the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis. Moving back to the society itself, we also have a little announcement for you this evening. We're incredibly pleased to be able to say that on the basis of our carbon action plan, the Society is moving forward with plans to be carbon neutral by 2022 through offsetting, and to at least halve our carbon outputs at origin by 2030. We are, however, looking to ensure that our approach to carbon offsetting is effective as possible, rather than rushing in. John Box, who's been working with us on the committee, is currently drafting some principles for offsetting. We're really grateful to be able to use his expertise in this area to help us guide us through some of the decisions that need to be made to make sure we're making the right choices here, to make the society as sustainable for the future as possible. And hopefully we'll be able to update you on some information around that really soon. So this has been some first steps. We've got a really long way to go and we need your help. And I've seen that there are several really interesting questions and thoughts and ideas already coming through on the questions and chat. So that is absolutely brilliant. We need your help and we're really excited about the start of this initiative for the Society and delighted to be able to launch this evening with you all, including our panelists. Please do, if you can, nominate yourselves through the link on the web pages. And do take some time to have a look through our carbon action plan and the rest of the website as well. If you want to contact us about anything else, we also have a new email address. So you can send us your ideas, your questions, if you haven't got time to ask them tonight, or if we don't get around to everything, because I can see the Q&A is getting busy. So please do use that. We'll be really happy to answer your questions or listen to your ideas through that. So you can see on the slide there, there's a few different ways to contact us. Hopefully you'll have a few seconds just to jot down some of those contact details there as well, and the details of the web page too. For now, however, I'd just like to say thank you to all of our fellows who've attended this evening, to our speakers, Bill, Andy and Ruth, and the rest of our committee members, Andy again, John, Padma, Helen and Elizabeth, who I think is in the audience too, and to Sandy and the Council for trusting us to take this initiative forward from our shared resolution last May. On a personal note, I'm really excited for the next steps for Linnean Future and where we go next. But for now, I'd like to open the platform to you and to your questions. And Sandy, I think you've been collating some of the questions for us.
I've been trying, but there's loads and loads. There's many questions. I'm just going to start with one which Andy's actually already answered in the sort of chat, but somebody's asked a very similar question, is what about human population?
Yeah, it's a question that we're often asked, and it's true that the bigger the population, other things being equal, the harder it is to balance nature's books and have demands that we make on nature not going above the level at which nature can replenish the supplies. But another way you can look at it is, if we shared resources more equally, we'd be able to have twice as many people as we do now. So, and you can work that out pretty easily, because the most impactful 15% or so of the world's population have the same impact on nature as the remaining 85%. So you could certainly get up to like 1.7 times the current global population without increasing demand, just by sharing it around more evenly. So what we have to do, many different actions in the portfolio. Ruth mentioned that access to the ability to plan families will certainly help speed up that demographic transition. But it would be terribly wrong to think that slowing the birth rate is what's needed, and lets us in the developed world off the hook. No, most of the damage that's been done historically has been done by the currently rich countries. Most of the damage being done now is being done by countries where the population size is not increasing. So it's not only population.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And there's a few here that I'm going to kind of try to riddle into one for Ruth about the Dasgupta review, because the review was commissioned by Theresa May's government, and so has the current government responded, and how can we help to make sure that this doesn't just disappear down some kind of black hole somewhere?
Yeah, thanks for that last one as well, because so it was commissioned by Philip Hammond, so that's 2 chancellors ago, and it continues to have support, and actually it's got huge support from our current Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who actually came along to the launch alongside Prince Charles and David Attenborough. So that was hugely great, and he's actually asking a lot about what the government response is going to say. So he's directly, personally interested, which always gives a bit of what's the word? A bit of a kind of kick up the backside, of various departments to make sure they're really engaging properly with this. So I think that's really positive. The way it works is we've done our review, and then the government, coordinated by Treasury, will do a response, which is due out in what they call in spring. So I'd say about May. So it's quite rapid, but they're also interested in sort of longer term thoughts and ideas that come out of the review that maybe not fixed, in the government response in May. The other thing is it's informing both of the COPs that we've got this year are on the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Climate Change COP, and also the G7 presidency that we've got. So they're using it to inform some of the discussions around how to make finance more sustainable as well. So I hope that that means it won't disappear into a black hole. But yeah, we've got to wait till May to hear what the government response is going to be. May-ish, you know.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Well, I think the more we talk about it, the more it's there. So, you know, saying things 3 times and they stick in people's heads, isn't that what they always say? There's a very interesting question here about, do the panel think that governments and the public may better appreciate the risks and costs of delaying action after the very publicly demonstrated impact of delaying action in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in different countries over the last 12 months? Albeit at a terrible cost, might people have learned an important lesson regarding the importance of responding sooner rather than later? Does anybody have thoughts about that? Andy?
I would certainly hope so, but the potential downside, which we've also seen today with the budget, is the concern that money is now tight. And there is still too much of a tendency, I think, among decision makers to view nature as an alternative to economic growth rather than part of economic growth. So the concern, and we've seen it with overseas aid budget, for instance, the concern is that with budgets being tight at the moment, there won't be money for this. And I very much hope that the Prime Minister and the others who are fully on board with this will kind of win out against that. And I think there is hope from things like the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which, as I understand it, has support across all the government departments. It's not just from an individual department.
Bill, you made a noise, which always indicates you have something to say.
No, I just think that I agree totally with Andy. I hope that would be the case, but I do worry that actually, the question I think was, will we've seen the impact of what a delay will have. Will that then mean people will respond, or there'll be a greater response in terms of responding to this crisis in the planetary situation? And I worry that it won't be. I think that now is a time to sort of really up the ante in terms of having to get people on board with this, because I think that actually the opposite might be true, that people will there's a sense that governments will focus their actions and their attentions more on the economy, trying to get the economy going again, on public health, and nature gets sort of sidelined. So I think this is a very timely initiative, and I think that it needs as much publicity and attention it can give. And on the sort of subject of that, I know Stephanie mentioned about organizing ideas or whatever, in any way we can contribute. And I was thinking about myself about doing shows and through my own performances and events, actually raising awareness of this. That's something I can contribute to, and I think that's something that I know a lot of people who are sort of like-minded would be very keen to do, because I think it's so important to get people talking about it, to get people understanding the benefits, the material benefits of the planet, rather than it's the environment and it's a kind of a thing, a nebulous thing, which most people's lives only impact on it when they are out and about, or a noise is made about the crisis. And I think that we all have to do whatever we can. I'm very up for doing an event which is
Band-Aid for the planet.
Well, exactly, something like that. I'd be up for that, definitely.
Yeah, let's go for it. Various people have asked whether the Society is participating in COP2 or in COP in Glasgow, and whether we're doing something for various UN decades of restoration and things. And I think as the president, I'm just going to kind of answer those and say that actually we're small. The society is not a big place, and those places are really big. If you've ever been to a conference of the parties of either climate or biodiversity, they're very big, they're very loud, and small voices very rarely get heard. So I think we have a platform that's really unique, as Bill said. We have a platform that's people from all kinds of different perspectives. So we have a platform that that we can really make an impact with our platform, maybe by not necessarily joining in with what everybody else is doing, but doing things in our own particular way, which may seem small, but sometimes small things have very, very big impacts.
I think it's about approaching different audiences in different ways, isn't it? And approaching, because there are so many different people with different ways of communicating and different ways of investing in the environment. And Bill's suggestion there is absolutely fantastic, because that is potentially whole audiences, which certainly the Linnean Society is unlikely to reach on our own.
In the courtyard.
Absolutely, yeah. So there are many different ways of engaging, and COP is one of them. And what we will likely find is that there are many of our fellows who are involved in it through different strands of their work as well, and will be able to discuss a lot of the issues that we're looking at in forum like that, because they're involved in this in many, many different ways. The Society has a fantastic reach in ways that it approaches different audiences, and I think we really need to capitalize on that.
We are our fellowship. There's one here that's interesting that I'd like Ruth and Andy to kind of maybe comment on a little bit, because we focus so much on the Dasgupta report. Is kind of someone's asked about whether we could use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as sticky glue to align everything, and how do those UN Sustainable Development Goals align with some of these other newer sort of thoughts which are coming out now?
So yes, definitely, and the review does consider the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and and they're really important. I think what this economic framing that I presented to you today does is kind of enable a whole suite of decision makers to actually engage more sustainably with nature, and thereby contribute to a whole range of those UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's trying to provide some of the theory and the sort of framework for a lot of these folks who haven't been sustainably engaging or making decisions that take any account of nature whatsoever, even though they rely on it. To bring it into their framing. So in that sense, it does support many of those goals. Andy, I don't know if you want to add.
Just that what Ruth was saying in her talk about moving beyond GDP is so crucial to this, because when sustainable development has been couched in terms of GDP growth, it's then in direct tension with the natural and human capital, which underpin some of the other SDGs within it. So this kind of framing that the Dasgupta review provides, I think, is a more straightforward articulation of how the SDGs together join up to be a better world. So I think it's really helpful working towards that, and it provides a kind of a vocabulary that lets actions be pegged to the SDGs more straightforwardly.
Someone's asked here about how can we make natural history a more important part of UK schooling, and talks a bit about the national curriculum. And again, from a society point of view, there is a new GCSE in natural history with which we've been intimately involved in kind of thinking about how you would go about that. And our education team has been involved in thinking about how we put that together. So there is a change. I mean, there's a change coming. It's just a lot of us wish it had come sooner, but at least it's coming down the railroad track, I suppose. Now there's another. Now it's very difficult because there's thousands of questions, and I'm trying to kind of put them together. Here's an interesting one: is how, Steph, this is one for you. Is how will, well, one for you and one for me maybe, and for council in general, is how would we measure success? What will success look like with this program?
That is a really, really good question, and actually something that realistically we're still working on balancing, because we are looking right across the work of the society. Some of those answers are actually really easy, and I've given you one of them already, which is to do with our response to the society's carbon outputs, and we have targets that we've already set ourselves around not only offsetting our carbon that we are producing, or carbon equivalent that we are producing, but also looking to at least halve that by 2030. So there we already have elements that we're working on, but this is very much a work in progress. We know that there are specific elements of the society's work that we want to look at, and there are a lot of conversations still to happen. So watch this space. We will come back to you with some answers on that, I think is probably the best thing I can say right now. But yeah, we do need to look at what success in all four of those strands is really going to look like when we're really looking at the work of the society and how our fellows engage with it.
And this ties very much into the new vision and mission of the society, which is a world where nature is valued and understood and protected, but also a mission to engage, involve, and inspire people with nature. So those two things very much go hand in hand. And as a council, as part of our governance review and rethinking, you know, not rethinking what we are, because the Linnean Society is many things to many people, but actually thinking about how we can go from strength to strength in the next decade of the 21st century. That very much goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah.
So Andy, you had your hand.
Yeah, just it's great that we will be trying to establish measures of success, but also I think the nature of the threat here is something where a cost-benefit analysis doesn't really apply, because failure would be not trying. It may be hard to know the ways that we have impact. That wouldn't necessarily mean that we haven't had impact, because so much of it is about starting conversations, changing the mood of conversations and ongoing discussions, and in the end, potentially influencing decisions that we never even see taken by people who we don't directly contact ourselves. So attributing that to our own actions would be incredibly difficult, but we simply have to try.
Yeah, and there's a question here that's come up. Edward Hoare's asked, and it feeds right into what you said, is with this whole discussion, who influences the narrative best? So that's kind of an open question. And what do you have a thought on that, Bill? Is who really influences the narrative best, or does everybody influence the narrative in their own way?
I think no. I think everyone does in some way. I think Andy's right. It may not even be quantifiable. Showing enthusiasm, trying to inspire people to about nature has a sort of an effect. It goes out into the wider world. Who knows what influence this has? I mean, but I think that you're right. You have to, we all have to keep going. This is a huge fight we all have to get involved in. And I think that perhaps the thing that I take hope from is that from this terrible pandemic that we're in, is that perhaps one of the sort of upsides of that, and maybe there are a few positives to take from. One of them is that people have had a greater appreciation of the natural world as a result of it. As a result of realizing this, the how it sustains us. Not just on a kind of, in terms of the well-being of the planet, but everyone's well-being. It has an enormous value, and perhaps that's something which we can, all of us, try to sort of capture, to try and articulate and disseminate to the wider world. I know I certainly do.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that as well, is that there maybe isn't just one narrative as well. So I've been working in Treasury, which frankly is quite weird, coming from a place where we all wear socks and sandals and we love I love bats, I'm a bat specialist. So you know, going into Treasury has been really interesting, and you know, I've had to sort of adjust, and you can see the way I talked about the Dasgupta review. It's the language is to speak to that group of people so that it's a narrative that they can associate with and get behind, but still we're making the case for nature. So I think sometimes we, you know, we need to meet people halfway and speak in their language to get them to engage as well.
That's absolutely right. And the stories that we tell ourselves through these narratives and the stories we build for ourselves through how we talk about this will change over time. How we talk to a child through our education program will not necessarily have directive effects right now, but 5, 10, 20, 30 years later, those stories can stay with that individual. And I think many of us will know that that's true from our own experiences with the natural world and learning to love and care for the environment and natural history. And our different experiences, our different ways that we tell these stories change. And hopefully what we can do in our way in the Linnean Society and through the wider work of our fellows in all the different walks and aspects of their lives can do is start to change some people's narratives and some people's stories. And hopefully that way we'll all start to make an effort as we work on this together.
There's a question here from Menghua who asks, is it possible for a non-English speaker to contribute something in this issue in the Linnean Society? And I would say absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Because you know, this is an issue which transcends. I mean, it you know, in one way, you know, so for example, there was a letter in the Telegraph today from someone in Hong Kong about the society. So in a way, we have fellows everywhere. There are fellows all over the world, and each of them is the society. So everyone who is a fellow is the society. And so collectively, you know, we have a huge polyglot voice, which is the best voice to have of all, really.
Yeah. We're incredibly keen that this works across the global fellowship of the society, and that includes including voices of people from right around the world, and we are very, very keen to do that, and we'll make every effort to include that diversity as you know within what we're doing here. This is a global planetary emergency, and the only response we can have is to really focus on this as a global issue.
Yeah, there's someone's asked here about the 10-point plan for green industrial recovery, references national parks and areas of natural beauty, about restoration of nature. And they say it needs to go much wider than that for ordinary landscapes and local green spaces being made more biodiversity rich, rather than keeping the focus on a few moderately good places. Could the Linnean Society respond to that 10-point plan with respect to this wider application of restoration?
That's a great suggestion. I really like that. One of the areas that I work in the Natural History Museum is the urban biodiversity work that we're working on in the Angela Marmont Centre, and I know you're involved with as well, Sandy. And it's not just about these fantastic, amazing spaces. It's not even necessarily about our smaller green areas, but the biodiversity we can bring into our urban landscapes, right into the heart of cities. That's really vital to how we find solutions to this. Making our urban spaces permeable and habitable by wildlife and nature is really important too.
There's a suggestion for a talk. We need to organize a speaker on something like that, which would be really, really good. Yeah, so there are a couple of other ones about consumption and about I'm going to paraphrase several questions and probably get all of them wrong, but that it's about whether we can change consumption patterns through coercion or through hoping people will do the best thing, or whether there has to be some compulsion to the change in consumer patterns. Is there a balance between those two things? What should the balance be?
There's so many. For me, there's different aspects in that as well, because some of it is about showing people a pathway, showing people how easy some simple changes can be that can even save them money when it comes right down to it too. Ruth, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at something called socially embedded preferences, which is the idea that you kind of you kind of behave like lots of people that are around you. So, you know, if everybody in your village has got a Range Rover, you're more likely to get yourself a Range Rover because that's the kind of social norm. And there are lots of ways through things like called nudge, where we can kind of get people's behaviour to change a bit to make them sort of more sustainable without decreasing their feeling of well-being. You know, so I think there is a lot we can do in that space that's really interesting, actually, to influence these sort of preferences socially.
So one tipping point that I think we might be quite close to in parts of the world, including the UK, is attitude towards eating meat. So I've switched to a vegetarian diet for health reasons, but in just the 3 years that I've been vegetarian, it is so much easier to live that way. And compared to 10 years ago, massively easier. I don't know what fraction of particularly younger adults are vegan or vegetarian, but it's through the roof compared to what it was a few years ago. I really enjoyed Simon Amstell's mockumentary Carnage, looking back from a vegan future to the hardly ever spoken about time when we ate meat. And then the social pressure has just tipped over completely. I think with some things we may be quite close to those big changes.
Definitely.
These conversations have come out a lot more in the very general public spheres, haven't they? They're part of everyday conversations increasingly, and I think that's really important.
One thing we've talked about earlier, and this is not a question, but I'm going to ask a question now because I get to, because I'm here, is Andy, we talked about trade-offs. Is it the fact that there's never really, we talked about this the other day when we were talking about something and about that there's trade-offs, like if you have more electric cars, you end up mining more because you need more minerals to run the batteries, which actually might be worse than pulling the petroleum out of, you know, so there's never anything that doesn't come with a trade-off. So understanding that there are trade-offs, I think, helps. It makes it difficult, but could it help as well, understanding that there are trade-offs?
So I think we have a bit of time to work out the optimal position because we know we're such a very long way from it. So we don't have to have the precise postcode in you know, at our fingertips now. We know broadly the direction we need to go, and we also know where we need to get a handle on the shape of these trade-offs and pushing the kind of co-benefits of things as well. So to try and explore what might be the best destinations that we can get to.
Yeah, Matthew Frith, who's one of our council members, has put a comment in here that urban green spaces have many biodiversity champions, which are focusing on the planetary emergency in many ways. The message is taken seriously by these people, but government's lead on these issues is the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which is basically exposing big silos in current government practice. So maybe the society can play a role in kind of trying to create that place for conversations to happen across different places. I mean, in a way, that's what the society has always been. The society is a place where the conversation about evolution by natural selection, where Darwin and Wallace's papers were first read, happened. And that was an idea that changed the way in which we view the world. So I like to think that we can still be a place in which those conversations can happen. Let me see if I can find another. So I'm not quite sure where this is coming from, but I'm just going to read it, and then people can respond to it. Is to what extent is there a line? It's just because there's a typo. To what extent is there alignment between food, agricultural, and environmental policy? As a former farmer in the beef and tillage sector, every single food choice we make is a choice for a farming system and therefore for land use that determines the world we choose to live in. So what's the tension between those? And I think, Andy, you touched on that a little bit about, you know, our food choices, but is there another angle to that?
Yeah, I think Ruth is going to be much better qualified than me to speak on this, but certainly I was very struck by what Dieter Helm wrote in his book Towards Net Zero on the extent to which agriculture in many parts of the world is a particularly good use of space. He reckons not. But Ruth, you, I'm sure, will have more of a handle on this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting and important area. I mean, I think it's the FAO suggests that we could feed the planet with 50% of the agricultural land that we currently have globally. So, you know, there's loads of opportunities about making choices and becoming more efficient, and over food choices, as Andy said as well, and thinking about where we best focus our farming practices and leaving other areas free for nature. Yeah, it's very difficult to do. I mean, yes is the answer to the question. They're really important and they all need to kind of align. And there's quite a lot of work going across different departments at the moment looking at it. We've got this new food strategy that's being looked at as well. That will be interesting for you guys to kind of engage with as well. But yeah, I mean, and because ours was a global review, you know, definitely different places. It's not, as Dieter described, terribly efficient in some places. But then, you know, people get their food very locally, so they have to be able to survive. I mean, things like fisheries as well. We haven't talked much about marine, but there's a big push on marine conservation and restoration, which is really critical. But of course, people rely on fisheries locally. So all of these things we have to do in a way that enables people to sort of survive and thrive. So it is quite complex.
Yeah, there's an interesting question here about someone is asking for the panel's view on the impact of the Stern Review, and whether there are any lessons that can be learned about the impact of the Stern Review to kind of create more impact for the Dasgupta Review.
So quickly, Lord Stern was on our advisory panel, and so that was great. And I don't know if you guys remember when the Stern Review came out. You know, it had a bit of press and quite a lot of criticism, and it kind of rumbled away for a few years until it really, you know, started to have, you know, significant influence. I think the Dasgupta Review, we've really landed luckily in the way that there's lots of initiatives going on this year. So we're really hoping that it might kind of kickstart a lot of this change at the moment. But yeah, we have set in place. We've got a lot of champions throughout different organisations as well to kind of continue to carry on the work and thinking about the work that's come out of the review. So we're hoping that that approach, which, you know, we've learned from the Stern Review, will help it having real longevity going forward.
Great. There's a lot of questions about how disappointing government action is, but I think that those are more comments than questions. Let me see. So someone said many of us will be at COP26 and other events. Something like a Linnean Future lapel badge would prompt questions if members were prepped and could help spread the word very efficiently. Well, we just have to get our act together pretty quickly, won't we? Yeah, so
it's an interesting idea, though. I like it.
Great idea. And lending some of our artworks. We have amazing artworks. They're mostly pictures of old white men, though.
Yes.
We don't like to own our Darwin portrait very often, or our Wallace portrait, because they're very precious.
Yeah, and I've just seen a really interesting comment come up as well around representing Indigenous voices within what we're doing here too, which I think, again, very, very important within this. That, you know, we do consider all people when we're discussing this. Very, very much so.
So there's another question about the food thing, Andy, and this kind of goes back to what you and I were talking about the other day, is it really plant versus meat, or is it where local versus far away? I mean, what's the balance between those things?
So near can be good. meat, the environmental impact of the scale of meat production in our global food system is, it's startling that if you weigh all of the world's mammals, then 60% is livestock, 36% is humanity, and the other 5,000 species is 4%.
Which is a startling number.
How did we, we have a world full of cows, basically.
Yep.
It's astonishing. Over a quarter of the world's surface is used to feed livestock. That could be natural, much more natural land. I mean, okay, so there are grazing systems and grazing systems. There are some rangelands and some alpine pastures traditionally managed in the way they have been for centuries that are really rich in biodiversity and fully sustainable. But there are huge areas of managed pasture replanted with alien species, fertilized, pesticided, biotic deserts to give us milk and meat. We don't need as much of that. As a planet, we've got to do better than that. Sorry, that stopped being a nuanced answer and became a rant partway through. I apologize.
It's all right, Andy. You're allowed to rant. You're allowed to rant. There's questions in the chat. There's also questions in the chat, and there's people's comments about ways in which they're doing individual things. And I think that's really great, because this means that our fellows, you as our fellows, are interested. And those of you who are not fellows, heaven forbid, actually could become fellows, and that would be great, because then we have more new fellows and Bill won't be the newest one.
Yes. That'd be great to welcome some new fellows in.
Well, there are a lot of new fellows coming in, and it's good, and I think it shows in a way that we are showing people our direction of travel a bit better than we have in the past, and I think that's important for us, because we can make an impact, because we do have a really good platform with which to kind of take all of these things forward. Lots of people have said happy to be involved. And there's a question for Ruth, and then I might ask one kind of final big overall question, because we're already almost a half an hour over time, which is fine, unless no one has hard stops. Ruth says, could the Linnean Society join up with Natural England to work in conjunction with the UK national parks that would work as exemplars of what might be achieved in the UK, achieved in terms of what you were talking about impact evaluation, and how might one fund such an exemplar?
Yeah, great question. So I can't really make Natural England's policy up on the hoof, but I really like the idea. We do work with national parks as we stand at the moment. So and particularly try and get them to be kind of exemplars if they've got areas of particular conservation importance through sites of special scientific interest. And we also work with them through their management plans as well. But, I think in some cases there probably are improvements that could be made if we can find the resources. I think often it's the funding that's the critical bit. So, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I kind of hope is that, if we get Treasury, I mean, there have been comments about different bits of government not being in silos. I mean, really, we want nature to be part of government thinking across all of the different departments. And, one of the things I'm an independent review person, okay, so I'm not speaking from Treasury. But what I would say is, wouldn't it be great if, Treasury was one of the kind of green, was the kind of green department in government that, had nature as core part of its consideration, and then hopefully some of these resources that we need to do the work will sort of flow from that. But yeah, I mean, we're not quite there yet, but the fact that they even commissioned the review and commissioned the Stern review, I think is a good sign that they're seeing that this stuff is on their radar. So, you know, and even just being in there, a lot of my colleagues are talking a lot more about this now, which I think is really positive. There's steps in the right direction.
That's great. I think that's almost a good way to end. Is that you know, I'll leave it to Steph to you know, kind of enthuse everyone to join up, but I'd like to enthuse people to become fellows of the society and join us in some of these things that we're trying to do, and you know, which go out into all kinds of different areas, because in a way the society is a neutral place. It's a place that we are a fellowship. The society is our fellows. And our fellows come from all kinds of places and walks of life, and are independent in their own way. So it's a very good place to begin those kinds of conversations. So any last thoughts from the panel? Andy?
Questions come in saying anything that's a hopeful message for the younger generation. And I think that there's definitely a hopeful message to the younger generation. Twofold. Situation we're in is not your fault. Hold us to account. Hold my age group, my demographic to account. Don't let people like me get away with cheating you out of a beautiful natural world that is your birthright. You should have it, and we will do our best to make sure you do get it.
Thanks. Ruth?
Yeah, I think yeah, thanks. And you know, I hope that was a positive message that I kind of gave at the end there. But also, I think we're, you know, it's a real sense of a tipping point at the moment in a positive way, in that there's so much interest in fixing the problems of biodiversity loss and climate change, you know, in sectors of society that haven't normally engaged with this at all, and not just in a narrow sense. We've talked about food, we've talked about sustainability, behaviour change, and all of that. And I think, you know, that's really, really positive this year, and I'm really hopeful that we get, you know, significant commitments and changes in the way that we make our decisions to enable us to sustainably engage with nature going forward.
Great. Bill?
Well, I would say to all young people, and that is, get involved on a local level. You know, find ways that you can contribute. I'm sure there will be, but these kinds of initiatives, they start at a grassroots level. They start small and they grow. And you know, don't think that your voice will not be heard. You know, don't think that because you're working on a small project in maybe a low green space, that's not important. It is. All of these things are important. It's the collective voice of all of us that actually carries these initiatives forwards. So, you know, whatever you do, whatever small project you're involved in, it's important.
Great. And I'll leave the last word to you, Steph.
Thank you, Sandy. And really to echo actually a lot of the positive comments that have just come through here. We all can do something. We can all play a part, no matter how big or how small that might seem. And hopefully this new initiative that we've started here this evening, and that we've been working on for a little while backstage in the Linnean Society, is a vehicle for people to do that, to come together to discuss a lot of these issues, as we've been starting this evening as well, and continuing conversations as well that have been going on for years. So the society is a forum for discussion. It always has been. And now we have this real impetus to hone some of this work that we've been doing as individuals and as a society, as fellows who, as you quite rightly say, Sandy, are the society. The society simply wouldn't exist without our fellows. So to echo your comments on become fellows, become part of the society, share your interests and your care for the environment and the natural world, and hopefully together we can start to drive some more of these conversations forward and create a much more positive future for our planet as well.
That's great, Seth. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the panelists for spending the time tonight and staying later than our allotted hour. And thank you, Padma, for setting this all up. And thanks to the committee. And please, everyone, do go look at the website, read the blogs, look at the podcasts. There's a wealth of stuff in there, even though we've only just launched the initiative tonight. So thank you very much. And over and out from the Linnean Society. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.